Canada's economic situation is worsening as the Labour report has come out for October that shows the economy just continues to decline as the central planners like Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau have no idea what they are doing. It is proof that their policies are essentially leading a lot of people to financial ruin. So let's get right into it now. So Canada's jobless rate rises to 5.7 in October as economy sees modest 18,000 job gain. Now, we'll get into the nuance of the report in a second, but I just want to read you out what the mainstream media is saying here. So Canada's unemployment rate rose to 5.7% last month as job opportunities became less plentiful in an economy weighed down by high interest rates. Statistics Canada released its October labour force survey Friday, which showed the economy added a modest 18,000 jobs, and we're going to get into where those 18,000 jobs were created, which is not going to shock many of you, but maybe will shock many of you new viewers to this channel where those jobs were actually created. I bet you're guessing right already. The gain was not enough to keep the unemployment rate from rising as the pace of job creation trails population growth. And that right there is literally the bad policies from the government. Trudeau, Freeland continue to push this immigration agenda for God knows whatever reason. And it is just meaning essentially the people coming to Canada are going straight into a depression. Immigrants that are actually in Canada are starting to realize, as you're starting to see more headlines come out like this, immigrants are leaving Canada at faster pace. Study shows newcomers face high housing costs, underemployment, onward migration, existential threat to prosperity, says an advocate. You know, it is kind of crazy what's happening in Canada. You have this dynamic going on right now where so many people want to leave the country because they believe the situation is bleak for the future. And I agree with them. I do think it is. I think the policies that have been pushed over the past decade just kind of show where we're going. So let's look on a chart for unemployment. You can see it's risen there. I've put this out to 2 years so you can see what it was like going back into the start of 2022 where we were at around 6. So we're above all the rates pretty much seen in 2022 apart from this one in January right here. If you look at the 1 year, you can see that unemployment has substantially increased, but most of that is due to the population growth and these ridiculous policies. But obviously, when you look into the nuance of the report, province by province, so we'll just quickly go over that. You can see that most places were flat for unemployment. So you can see BC 0%, Alberta 0.1%, Saskatchewan down to 4.4%, Manitoba plus 0.2% for unemployment, Ontario plus 0.2%. You've got the Atlantic provinces suffering particularly bad here. You've got PEI, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. You can see that the unemployment rate is quite high there. You've also got the Newfies out there at 10% unemployment rate. Now, obviously, they're smaller markets. Also, what happened was the wage gains slowed down. They still went up 3 cents, if you can believe that. Essentially, it slowed right down. So compared to the last month where there was a substantial gain, you saw the wage pressures starting to ease, which is what the Bank of Canada wants. I think that's ridiculous. You actually want the wages to increase because the fact is that people are being destroyed by this, as I've been over many times on this channel. So let's get into the highlights now of this report. So this is the labor force survey for October 2023. Unemployment was little changed in October, 18,000 jobs created. We knew that. So where were the sectors that employment was up? Employment was up in construction. There's been a lot of volatility in construction jobs, and obviously we've seen everything that's going on. Lots of developers and home builders are going bankrupt right now, and they're having significant difficulties. I've seen many of you commenting on this. Some of you actually business owners who say that you are declaring bankruptcy right now. So yeah, that's what's going on there. You've got IT jobs that are up, and you've got wholesale and retail trade jobs that are down, manufacturing jobs that were down. And this is really interesting. I've highlighted this because it's so suspicious, and I'll leave you to decide what actually is going on here. So employment increased in 4 provinces in October, led by Alberta. We're going to get onto that in a second, plus 38,000 jobs, whilst it declined in Quebec, minus 22,000 jobs. I saw that and I immediately thought, well, hang on a second. I swear that was the exact same number that we had of lost jobs last month in the survey. And I was right. So I went to the survey and I took a look, and you can see that in the prior month, employment declined in Alberta by 38,000 jobs, and it increased by 38,000 jobs in this report. That's a little bit suspicious. What are the odds of that happening, guys? I think very, very low. So I don't know what is going on there. Obviously, we know all this data is highly manipulated. I mean, I don't want to throw on my tinfoil hat here, but this is mightily suspicious what we are seeing here. But anyways, so let's get into what's going on, because they also had something interesting about households and basically saying that they're experiencing financial difficulties. And this was the percentages. So if you look at households experiencing financial difficulties going by major metro areas, Toronto, Calgary, Saskatoon, Edmonton, Halifax, Regina, all fall below the Canada average, but particularly Toronto and Calgary are the two cities where financial trouble looks most likely. And I've got a lot of reports that I'm probably going to go through next week, because there's been more stuff that's more important to do over this week's stream. So it's very interesting what's going on there. You've got Windsor, you know, Kitchener, Cambridge area, same thing. These are all the places where real estate boomed, essentially. Even if prices weren't booming like Calgary, you still had a massive amount of people buying real estate in 2021. And we know the probability of them having a variable rate mortgage is very high. So a lot of these people are in financial difficulties. You've got the renters. They're also in financial difficulties because rents have risen so much and their wages haven't kept pace with that at all. So you've got major problems that are going on right now in the economy. So this is kind of crazy, guys, and I'm going to read this to you. And again, it just like the reports that we went through last week kind of shows you what the sentiment really is like right now in the economy. So in the spotlight, 1 in 3 Canadians live in a household experiencing financial difficulties. Fantastic. Just keep those immigrants coming. It's just ridiculous, isn't it? Inflationary pressures have eased compared with 2022, and year-over-year growth in the consumer price index has decelerated. However, the higher cost of essential goods and services continue to place financial pressures on many households across Canada. In September, for example, increases in the cost of shelter 6% and food 5.9% outpaced annual wage growth at 5%. And as we know, guys, these numbers, you can just completely throw them out. In fact, just double them and you get closer to the actual numbers that are out there. So you're probably talking 12% for both of those. So 12% rises versus 5% wage gains. That's not a good combination, is it? It just shows how the economy is in such poor shape. So in October 2023, 1 in 3 Canadians aged 15 and older, 33.1%, was living in a household that found it difficult or very difficult to meet its financial needs in terms of transportation, housing, food, clothing, and other necessary expenses over the previous 4 weeks not seasonally adjusted. So that is a terrible statement right there when you really think about it. So people are struggling to put food on the table, which explains why so many people are going to food banks. People are really struggling right now with the economic environment, the immigration numbers that we're bringing into the country. We cannot cope. The system is completely overwhelmed right now, and we continue to just bring more and more people over. I am just shocked that the government hasn't paused this. In fact, I'm not shocked because it's Trudeau. It's Justin Trudeau's government, and he is an absolute moron. So anyway, let's continue on here and just get into the industries, which industries were contracting and which industries gain jobs, because it's quite interesting. So first of all, let's go over the class of worker, because this is really interesting. So the job gains were literally all public sector, guys, on net balance. So when you look at public sector employment, it rose. It was responsible for 95% of the job gains that we saw this month, even though it was not an amazing number. So once again, government jobs and the government expansion is essentially masking how bad and terrible the economy really is. And that is what people kind of fail to wrap their head around. We are heading for this dystopia, essentially, where the government is just going to be the entire economy. Everything is going to revolve around the government. The government wants that, obviously, because then they can control everything. The power is then centralized. This is exactly what's happened in my home country, the UK, where the government is responsible for more than 50% of economic activity. Just think about that. And that's exactly where we're heading in Canada, down that same slippery slope. So it's very interesting what's going on there. And you've also got private sector employees. So that increased like very slightly, but practically nothing. Self-employed went down and kind of offset that. So it was really only the public sector employees, the gains there in government and the public sector that pushed this employment report actually higher. So the goods producing sector, construction jobs obviously increased. You can see that there. Manufacturing saw a massive decrease, which is consistent with what we are seeing with global trade recession right now. So that's very consistent. You've also got wholesale, retail, and trade, which saw a massive decrease as well in the jobs. Finance, insurance, real estate actually went down. We saw a decrease in the jobs there, although some provinces, the ones with and housing markets where prices are less, like Alberta, for instance, this actually went up. So it's something to bear in mind because that helps make this number look better than it actually is, even though it still looks particularly bad. You've got healthcare and social assistance jobs gained, accommodation and food services went down. This is all seasonally adjusted, I believe, as well. So essentially, you're seeing this despite the fact that they are adjusting for this seasonal drop off in demand, which they usually over adjust for that, let's face it. So it's very interesting what's going on in the labor market right now. And I just want to go over two charts real quick so you can see this. These charts come from National Bank. So National Bank, job creation mostly stems from public and self-employment. So when you look at this chart, you can see what's happened since 2020. Self-employment has really took a massive hit and has not recovered at all since 2019. And then you've got private sector job growth that has essentially stalled, started going down around the middle of this year. And this hasn't added on, obviously, the latest data that we've got. And you can see that basically this is obviously stalling out. And public sector employment, look at that. That has absolutely gone parabolic. Absolutely. You don't hear anybody talking about this. I mean, literally, the public sector has been the driver of the recovery since 2020. Seize the crisis, as Klaus himself says. And we know our government here in Canada is heavily involved with the World Economic Forum. Chrystia Freeland is a trustee, for crying out loud. So we know the government incredibly involved with the World Economic Forum, and they are certainly seizing the crisis. And then if you look at this chart, it shows what's going on with population growth. So you can see the actual job creation there, the red line. But if you adjust it to the population growth, you can see that pretty much since the start of this year, it's done nothing. And now it's starting to go down. So this is utterly a disaster, really. It is an economic disaster. We have absolute morons that are in charge of this country. But what do you really do? So anyway, if you've enjoyed this, you might like this video that I picked out for you here. You might like this playlist that I picked out for you here. And just another thing, obviously, censorship laws have been passed in Canada. That is why I'm promoting expressvpn.com/marketmania. There's a link down there if you want to go there. So anyway, I want to thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one. Take